Hello everyone. In the previous video, we understood the complete roadmap of this course. In this video, we will start hands-on development. So we will create a Spring Boot project, understand its folder structure and connect it with PostgreSQL. The structure will remain the foundation for our monolithic architecture and later on the microservices. So here, we can just use the Spring initializer here. So guys, in the Spring initializer we will just choose the configuration. So here we are just using the build tool as Maven. The language we are just using as the Java. Spring Boot side we can just use the version that is more compatible. So let's suppose I'm just choosing this one, and the project name like here, so we can just use the artifact kind of project name or its version. Okay, so let's suppose I'm just choosing the name as e-commerce. Okay, this is the name of the project, and here we can just add some dependencies. Okay, so in the dependency we can just add like web dependency for building the RESTful services. Later we can just add the JPA, Spring Data JPA for persistence purposes. We can add PostgreSQL driver, and we can also add the Lombok. Okay, so Lombok is basically provide us some libraries through which we can just reduce a lot of boilerplate code. So I'm just generating this one. Yeah, so here you can see like this is just generated here. Inside the downloads I just extract this folder here, and inside my IntelliJ I'm just opening that project. Okay, so here inside the downloads you can see not this one. Let me just open this back. Yeah, inside this downloads e-commerce, this one. Okay, so let me just open this one in the new window. Yeah, so here you can just see this. Okay, so here first of all we will just add its standard structure. Okay, so here inside the src main Java, here first we just need to add like what overall components we just need to add. Okay, so I am just adding like here the packages. The package name is like controller. Okay, so this controller is basically for handling the API request. Okay, so controller I just added here. Later on I can just add here the service. Okay, service is required for business logic. Okay, and inside the service we will just also add its implementation classes. Okay, and later I'm just adding the repository. Okay, repository, and here repository is for basically for database accesses we can say, and then we can just add here the entity. Entity is basically the database tables we can say. Then I'm just adding here the DTO. Yeah, so rather than exposing the all entities we can just use the DTO here, and one more package I'm just adding here for exceptions classes. Okay, and here we can also add last not least the config package. Okay, here. Yeah, so guys here in my systems I have already created one database, and its database name as e-commerce. Okay, and I have already created the user in its credentials, and here in the database DBAver you can just see like this is my e-commerce database. okay, like this one. So as of now we don't have any tables like here. So once I will just run the project, I mean like first we will just design the entire stuff here, and once we will just run the project, so our entity like kind of JPA, it will just generate those tables, okay. And later on we will just use the liquid-based changelog, through which we will just create our tables and do some alterations like performing some actions with the help of our changelogs, okay. So let's move on the coding part, okay. So here before going further, let me just add the application YAML. So in the application YAMLs, we just need to add inside the resource classes like here. So we can either use the application properties or application YAML file, okay. So rather than this, we can just directly use. So I have one more project like the demo. So from here we can just take this YAML file, okay. So YAML syntax is more simpler, so I'm just choosing, but it's not mandate, okay. Yeah, so this properties file we can just remove from here, okay. So here, yeah, so you guys can see like we have the port number. This is the port from where we can just access our APIs, and this is our Spring data source. Data source means the database. So database URL we are just using. Currently my Postgres is just running on this 5436, this port, okay. And this is my database name. These are the username credential, you can see username, password, okay. And this is the our driver class name, okay. And here we are just using PostgreSQL dialect, and Hibernate auto I just set as update, okay. It means on each and every update it will automatically update our JPA entities, okay. And I have also added source SQL as true, so that we can just see like whatever the query which is just executing at internally or behind the picture, we can just see all those on the console, okay. And this liquid based part, we can just see this part later on our further sessions, okay. So I'm just removing this parts from here, and inside this, in this connection, you guys can just see like here. So here we are just using this local host, the port as 5436, as Postgres is just running on this port, okay. Authentication we are just using username, password. User I just put as admin, password I already put earlier like admin123, okay. Database name is e-commerce, and this URL is generated here, you guys can just see here like this, okay. Like a JDBC PostgreSQL colon localhost colon 5436 slash e-commerce, that is the database name, okay. So once we just click on this test connection, you guys can see like, yeah, it is succeeded. So we can just close this. Yeah, so this is done now, okay. So guys, now we will just move gradually further. So first we will just start from the entity. So inside the entity, first I'm just creating one entity class. Its name as user entity. This is nothing but our entity class. So here we just need to give the annotations like here, so that our system will understand like what's the responsibility of this class, okay. And this is our entity class, and it is the name of the table, okay. So this table name is basically the database table name, okay. So if we don't provide the name, then the default class name just generate as the name of the table. Otherwise we can just give our own name, okay. And here we have some Lombok annotations, okay. So Lombok, as we mentioned earlier, so this is basically provide us some libraries through which we can just save a lot of boilerplate code, okay. So here this is our setters, like getter setters we have just used, and here we just need to use no args constructor and all args constructor, okay. So here the Hibernate creates this entity object without knowing their constructor parameters. So we can say like using reflection. So here it needs a no argument constructor to instantiate the class, okay. So here this is our user entity class. So this one here we just need to provide, we can see like kind of primary key. So here in this class, the primary key we have just provided the generated value. Here the generated value means like the value of this ID is just use which kind of strategy. Okay, so here the strategy I'm just choosing as generation type dot identity. Okay, so we can either use identity, sequence, auto and all. Okay, so I will just describe each and everything later once we will just go this part one by one. Okay, so here this is nothing but the ID of this user entity, and we can just use more columns. Okay, so let's suppose I'm just using one more column, that is this annotations with name as, let's suppose username, or directly I'm just putting it says name. Okay, this is the column, and here we can just say like null label as false. Okay, so it means the value should be here, value should be required. Okay, and one more variable I'm just taking here like email. Okay, so this email again I'm just making that as null label false. Okay, so I'm just putting that value as null label false, and let's suppose we are just adding this as unique true. Okay, so email should be different for all. Okay, so this is our entity class. So entity is nothing but DB table. Okay, and this ID just generating the primary key. Okay, so now we will just move on the repository part. Okay, so here in the repository I'm just creating one, we can just say like interface, we can just create here like this one, Java class, we have interface as user repository. Okay, so here I just created one repository as user repository. So here I'm just extending this with JPA repository. Okay, so JPA repository like this one, and here we just need to give our entity class name here along with the primary key what we are just using in this table. Okay, like in our entity class. So here we can just create like all the methods what we are just thinking, like kind of find by ID, find by email. So few methods are just provided by JPA repository itself. You guys can see like here, like this method we can just see like save and flush. We have like all different methods like get by ID, find all. So these methods, but if we are planning to define our own methods, so we just need to design here. Okay, so and one more benefit of this user repository is like we no need to write the written, I mean like no SQL written here, no need to write these things, and that is the, I mean like we can say like JPA magic in itself. Okay, so user repository part is enough as of now. So now we will just move on our service part. So here it is our service package. Inside this service package I'm just creating one service class. So this service class, so rather than creating service class, we can just create the interface as service, and later on we can just do one implementation class. Okay, so here I'm just using as user service. Okay, and inside the user service we can just create the method. So let's suppose I'm just creating the method as user entity I'm just adding. So here we can just use like create user. Okay, so here we just use the camel case pattern like create user, and whatever the user we are trying to create, like what entity data should to be go inside the database, so that values I'm just passing here. Okay, and here we have the corresponding implementation class. Okay, let's suppose user service IMPL. Okay, so here we will just implement with user service. So here we just need to implement our this user service, what we just created this as interface, and here this one we just need to implement the methods. Okay, so this is our method. So in this method we just need to define our business logic. Okay, yeah, so here we just need to define our business logic. Yeah, so guys, first of all, this is our service implementation class. So here we just need to define our all the service related logics. So here we just need to first add our repository, like repository object. So repository is a repository. Okay, and here this is our method. So here what we need to do, we can directly add this user repository dot save. Okay, this method, so directly we can just add here. Okay, so we can just return this value. Yeah, and also for this, like here we just need to add the annotations as service, so that our controller layer we just communicate here, and also we just need to add required als constructor, so that this the error what we were just facing earlier, that will be removed. Okay, yeah, so guys, this is our service class responsibility is done. So now move on the controller side. So in our controller we just need to create our controller class, and this controller class name we can just give as user controller. So guys, this is the correct pattern, like just give the name in some symmetric order, like we have user controller, user entity, user repository, user services. Okay, in the same way. So inside this user controller we just need to add some annotations, first as REST controller. Okay, so here we just need to give one request mapping. Request mapping is just nothing but through which we can just call our these requests or these APIs request. So I'm just giving the name as like API slash users. Okay, and we also need to give like required args constructor. Okay, like these. So earlier you remember, like from here user service IMPA we just call this user repository, because the service layer is just making the connection with the repository, and our controller will just make the relation between the service. So we just need to inject the service here. So here I'm just adding like private final user service. Okay, so user service object I have already created. So here guys, first of all we will just create the user. So for that what we can do, we just need to add post mapping for that. Okay, so this request currently like here, this request mapping like API users. So this is the overall path. Later on we are just using the post mapping. Inside the post mapping we just need to create that method, like okay, the create user. So here I'm just using like this. This is our response entity. Inside the response entity we just need to give like what values we are just planning to send over here. This is our method create user, and here create user we are just provide the request body here. Okay, so when we are just communicating along with the front end. Okay, so that time we just provide like this data, we are just passing as a request. Okay, yeah. So here I am just returning this value like this, response entity dot okay, and directly we can just call this method, kind of like user service dot create user. Okay, and here we just pass this user. Okay, so let me explain this one. So here this is the post mapping, kind of post request, which it will just create our user details here, and here we are just using as response entity, so that whatever the values we are just passing inside our request body in the form of user, so that value will just return in the response entity in the form of JSON, we can say. Okay, and this request body is nothing but come in the form of request. Okay, and here this request body will just come from, either we can just get from Postman or whatever the UI just sending this data in the form of request body. Okay, and here inside this you guys can see, like here we are just using our user service dot create user, and here we will directly pass this user detail here. So this value will go here inside the create user, and inside this implementation you can just see the value. Okay, sorry, the code directly. Yeah, so now I'm just running the application. So here in the logs, yeah, so application just started on this port 8889. Okay, and here in the dbehavior, earlier we don't have any tables, so I am just refreshing this. So here you guys can see this table users. So this is the table, kind of like we have these three columns you guys can see. So now I am just opening the Postman. The Postman I am just using as, let me just use this request. We have this request, and this is our kind of post API. Okay, and inside the body we just need to give this data. Okay, so what data we just need to provide, like here you guys can see we just need to give this name and email. This is kind of generated value, it means it will generate automatically in the form of identity, so we only need to provide name and email here. Okay, so the name I'm just providing as, let's suppose I'm just providing Hemant Negi, and email let's suppose I'm just giving any email. Okay, so yeah, so let's suppose I'm just giving this email, so just sending this value. Yeah, so in the response we are just getting this in the form of this. Okay, so here you guys can see on the controller I'm directly getting the value in the form of response entity. So this response entity is nothing but, we can say, like internally Jackson, our Jackson library just convert our taking this as a request, kind of this user part, and convert in the response entity and provide us as in the form of JSON. Okay, that's why we can just see like this response here. Okay, so here we can just add we can say like more API endpoint. So why we are just adding more API endpoint, so that we can just see like what data we can just see over here. Okay, so let's suppose I just want to add more users, sorry, yeah, we can say like more users. Okay, so I'm just again click on send button. You guys can see like internal server error. What is the reason of this? So here we have just duplicate key constants. Okay, so here if in the entity class you guys can see like here unique is true. Okay, so it means email value should be unique in itself. Okay, so we just need to give another values here. Yeah, so you guys can see like here in the database we have these values. Okay, so now I am just adding more controllers, but more APIs through which we can just, let's suppose we can select all the user details. For that we just need to create one more method. So let's suppose I'm just getting all. So here guys, we are just getting all the users, so we just need to give the list of user entity. Okay, so here, yeah, so here I'm just giving the name of this method as get users, and here what we need to do, we just need to return user service dot get, let's suppose get all users. Okay, so I am giving this name, get all users. So inside this get all users, so actually this method is not, so we can directly create this method here, and its implementation we can directly add here. Okay, yeah, so here, yeah, what we need to do, we can directly call this user repository dot find all. Okay, so this find all method will just return our list of user entity. Okay, so if I'm just running this, yeah, so I'm just trying to running again. Okay, so in this time we can just use this endpoint, like this endpoint. So no, so here first of all I just need to add the get mapping. Okay, so in this get mapping, so the same URL with get we can just use here. So we can also do one thing here, like get mapping, but in this, now I'm running the project again. Okay, so guys, now we are having two endpoints. One is for creating the user, that is post endpoint, and second one is for fetching all the details. Okay, so here the application is up now. So in the Postman we can just use the same endpoint here and just generate the one new request for get, and here we have just all the user details. You can just see like here, and in the database we have these three user details. Okay, so guys, this is our overall session for today, and on our upcoming sessions we will just discuss about more on our liquid based changes, and rather than just exposing this entity class we will just use the DTO. Okay, and we will also look over our exceptions classes, configuration changes, and all. Thank you.